take my director's chair.
You're in charge. Hey everybody, can everybody hear me okay? I'm gonna forego the mic just for a moment this evening. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is James Monahan. I'm the programs director at the Hermitage Artist Retreat down on Minnesota Key. We're so excited both to be here back at Bookstore One and that you have joined us this evening. Bookstore One, don't tell anybody else, it's our favorite bookstore. We're not supposed to play favorites with our partners, but we love being here. It's such a beautiful space, and I challenge you to come here, see a program, and not walk away with a book. It's just like candy. But anyway, thanks to Bryn and to Georgia for hosting us. We're always happy to be here. And of course, thanks to our partners over at Unidos Now, who have joined us in sharing out this program. I'm thrilled to introduce you to DP Snyder and Mónica Lavín. You have their bios, so I won't dive into their full long list of works and accomplishments. You have that there. I'll do a little bit of that. But one or two more pieces of housekeeping before we get started. Reminder for you, as much as me, to please silence your cell phones. I want to thank our trustees at the Hermitage, whose guidance makes all of this possible, as well as the Gulf Coast Community Foundation and the Charles and Marjorie Barancik Foundation, who provide seasonal support for these programs so that we can bring them to you all across the community. We host many down at our beach on Minnesota Key and all throughout the community up here. Coming up, we have a presentation down on the beach with the Lazor brothers, who are Hermitage Greenfield Prize finalists. Two brothers writing musical theater, so we have somewhat cheekily called it a lifelong collaboration. We'll leave the rest of the writing to you all. But that's going to be a really exciting program down on our beach near the end of August. You have that information on the program you got when you came in. And we also have our Artful Lobster, our annual lobster gala buffet happening in November down on campus. A really fun event. Check that out. If you're interested in that, you can find more information on our website or talk to Amy or Travis, who you saw when you came in. I think the last thing I need to tell you is that you also got a survey on your way in. It's hugely helpful to us. If you take a moment at the end of the program to fill that out, we read every one of them and are very interested in what you have to say. If you need a pen, we have lovely Brandon pens here for you. Please use, take, and enjoy. All right, that is enough for me. And you have bios, but can I just say that Mónica Lavín has 9 books of short stories, amongst many other works. The list here is incredible. Do check it out. And her collaborator, translator, and writer extraordinaire, DP Snyder, I learned on the way in, knows everybody in the literary world and does just about everything, but she specializes in works by women and works of social importance. I will step out of the way and leave you in the capable hands of Mónica Lavín and DP Snyder.
Thank you. Do you want to use a microphone? Can you hear us if we speak in normal voices?
But I don't know the recording. What's better?
It's good for the recording.
Yeah,
to have
right.
like,
Okay.
It's not too much of a burden.
Very good.
Well, I'm very happy to be here with Dorothy, now a long-time friend, but it all happened with books. I have a friend, maybe you've heard about him, Guillermo Arriaga. He's known for the movies more than for his books, but he always said, books might not give you money, but they give you trips, traveling, and friends. And I've learned that throughout life. And I'm very happy that Patricia Caswell is here because she was my first contact with the Hermitage. And we are very thankful with all the Hermitage group for being our hosts and making it possible for us to work and to be here. The bookstore is beautiful, I agree. It's the best place to talk about books and to talk about the process behind the books. So I'm glad that you're listening to our conversation. We want to share it with you. And I'm saying that it's a long time now relationship because one day I got an email from Dorothy Potter Snyder, DP Snyder, saying, I just read your book. You're gonna phrase it better, but it was very warm and funny. And she said that she had read a book of mine that somebody had taken to her from Mexico and that she would like to translate me. And that was 2015. So that's been, I think that year I was in the Hermitage, in fact. I think it's been 9 years since that email, and look where it's got us. We even have a book together now.
We do, and let me turn this on. Hello, hello. Turn on. I can't begin to tell you how nervous I was to write to Mónica Lavín. I was so nervous to write to her 9 years ago that it took me 2.5 weeks to write that email. I was like, nope, it's not good enough. Nope, it's not good enough. And then finally, it was one of those press send, because I wanted so badly to translate her work. And I don't know if any of you know that feeling of literary desire. Like, this has to work, this has to happen. And the reason it happened, by the way, is because I also teach Spanish. And one of my students went to Mexico City and bought one of her collections, brought it back as a gift, because my students do that. So you see how friendship is involved? It's love, no? My student just loves me, loves the Spanish language, loves Mexico City, brought this book of all the books in all the world he could have bought as a gift from me. It was Mónica Lavín. And I always thank him for this, because from
Me too.
there,
Me too.
because I wrote to her and she wrote back the next day. The next day, and we translators are used to slow responses, we're a little bit invisible and things don't happen too fast. We're sure, go ahead, do it. And she noted that she laughed when she read my email, and I think that humor, our personalities, it's not just the literature, our personalities, it turned out, matched very well. We're not the same person in any sort of way, but we laugh together. And I want to thank the Hermitage as well, because we are rarely in the same place. I live in North Carolina, she lives in Mexico City, and we rarely have the opportunity to simply eat an omelet together, or talk together, or even take this work, some of the work we're going to read to you bilingually today, and talk about it, and ask each other about words, about phrases, about voices, about, well, is that what you really meant, And here at the Hermitage, even at times, we've gotten to our feet and said, no, this is what I mean, it's like this, or it's, using our bodies to explain what our characters are doing. So being here has been an enchantment, has been for us, for our work, but for us as friends, as creative friends, as collaborators, an invaluable experience.
And I have to thank Dorothy, because she not only wanted to translate my stories, but she was interested in having them published around in magazines. She was vehemente, I don't know the word in English. She was insistent in sending them here and there, and we got very nice responses. They have been published in several magazines, and then she curated a book. She chose several stories from several books, and it's Meaty Pleasures is the book that's here from Katakana published it, but for that book, she wasn't living in Mexico, and I wasn't in North Carolina, but she took a plane and went to Mexico. And we've been working here in the Hermitage. I had a house in Coyoacán, which is like an old part of the city, very nice, very cozy, historical. And we worked there, but we not only laughed, we cried also.
Yes.
And between questions and seeing if it was together when she was moved by something, I appreciated her tears because she was into my story, or when we laughed. So behind that book, Meaty Pleasures, really there's this bonding and this complicidad, how do you say complicidad?
Complicity.
Complicity of understanding what is the writing process, because she's also a short story writer and a novel, she's trying the novel right now, and what is the process to make that experience, that commotion when you read, happen to a reader in another language. So we were very happy when that work behind Dorothy, especially Dorothy's decision and drive to go to Mexico became a book with katakana. First an English version of those stories, and then a bilingual version of those stories. And katakana is based in Florida, right?
Absolutely it is, yeah. I forget where Omar is exactly, but he's south of here. But Omar Villasana, who's our publisher, and who is publishing only books in translation and bilingual editions. He's one of the small independent publishers who's fighting for works to appear. And we really thank Omar as well for sending the books here, and also some lovely bookmarks that we'll give to you afterwards. You know, I wanted to remark on that question that Monica brings up about emotion. We know it's right when we feel it. And if I don't, it's never in translation just about meaning. It's not a picking up like a piece of sand and putting it in another container. It is a process of alchemy, if you will. It really is, it's alchemia. It's like you have to get to that point where you as the writer, and if you're lucky enough to be side by side with your author, feel the same thing in your heart here, not just up here. And that's why I went to Mexico City. Now I have to say, our history is very long and we cannot tell you all of it here, but I do think it's important to mention that Monica graciously invited me to her writing workshop now 3 years ago. It was during the pandemic because her workshop went online. And so I accepted the challenge. I showed up and started to write more in Spanish and to critique other people's work in Spanish. And all of this has flowed into my work in English and my translation work and my writing in Spanish. So it goes both ways, because, I mean, we're here today because I translate her, but she also translates me, and furthermore, I learn more about what good storytelling is and what the craft of storytelling is from her, and that again comes back to me. So there's a constant back and forth between us that is very nutritive, I guess the word would be. It's a nutritive exchange that is so far from what most people think of the translator-writer relationship. Shall we read them a little bit?
Yes, of course. I have there's a short story that was just published in this book in Spanish, El lado salvaje, the savage side, you would say. But the story that's in this book was written here in the Hermitage on my past mementos. It's called The Mangrove. You might wonder why. It's called The Mangrove. And before even we could suspect that we would be here in the Hermitage together, right. I sent this, before it was published in Spanish, I sent this story to Dorothy, so that she would translate it to English, with the good fortune that it was published in a very prestigious magazine, literary magazine, Southern Review. So it first came out in English. Then it came, now it's part of my new book. So we'll just read a little piece so that you can get the feeling of the sound and the collaboration. Ready? Para llegar al manglar es necesario atravesar la carretera frente a la cabaña y tomar el camino arenoso que toca la orilla del manglar por 3 puntos. Ella suele llegar a cada uno y deja para el final el muelle público. Es de madera y tiene un letrero que advierte del cuidado que hay que tener con los manatíes. En este muelle la gente se embarca o pesca. Lo supo por el hombre que le dio los buenos días, café en mano, mientras se dirigía a su auto. Vengo todas las mañanas antes de ir al trabajo, añadió. Es muy bello. Aunque no pesque nada, lanzo la caña. Lo vio subir a la camioneta y arrancar. Ella siguió muelle abajo a la orilla del agua verdosa y oscura, donde un pato de pronto alzó el cuello y la sorprendió. Estuvo atenta al lugar donde se había sumergido por si de nuevo lo descubría, pero todos eran esbozos, sin un plan previo. El propio cuello del animal hundiéndose en el agua era una forma interesante, la curva como lo más vivo posible o como la forma ideal para cazar comida y jalar aire. Al día siguiente no fue a caminar, porque prefirió leer en la quietud de la buhardilla, mirando los tonos del amanecer sobre el Golfo de México. El rebote del sol en el pecho de las gaviotas que alzaban vuelo era espectacular. Aún no había ruidos de los que visitaban la playa. Le llamaba la atención cómo solo una pequeña franja de tierra dividía dos paisajes tan distintos en aquel cayo. La laguna rodeada de manglar parecía siempre secreta, con esa vegetación del tejido apretado y la luz teñida por el verde de las hojas, por el fondo más fango y menos arena. El mar, en cambio, se abría descarado hacia un horizonte plateado. Al día siguiente volvió a toparse con el hombre que pescaba y bebía café de un vaso de cartón. Le dijo que se llamaba Phil y preguntó su nombre. No supo por qué, contestó Ellen. Luego se disculpó consigo misma. Igual podía tener dos nombres, uno de artista y otro para caminar y saludar. Estoy segura que tú también tienes dos nombres, Phil, Steve, pensó.
To get to the mangroves, you have to cross the road in front of the house and take the sandy path that loops around the spit of land and touches the swamp's edge at 3 points. She always stops at each one, leaving the public dock for last. It's made of wood and has a sign that warns visitors to care for the manatees. People embark in small craft and fish from this dock. She found this out from the man who greeted her, coffee in hand, while on the way to his vehicle. I come here every day before I go to work. It's so beautiful. Then he added, I never catch anything, but I still cast out my line. She saw him get into his pickup truck and start the engine as she made her way down the dock to the dark green water's edge, where a duck suddenly raised its head, startling her. She kept an eye on the spot where it submerged in case she caught sight of it again. Everything here was an improvised sketch. Even the animal's neck plunging into the water was an intriguing shape, the liveliest curve possible, the ideal form for hunting food and drawing breath. The next day, she didn't take her walk because she felt like reading in the tranquility of the loft apartment that overlooked the pastel shades of dawn on the Gulf of Mexico. The sunlight reflecting off the seagulls' breasts as they took flight was spectacular. And there wasn't any racket from the beachgoers yet. Just a slender strip of land divided two such different landscapes on the quay, the lagoon surrounded by the tightly woven vegetation of the mangroves, always seemed buried in mystery, the light tinted by the verdant foliage and its bottom more mud than sand. The brazen sea spread itself out wide to the shimmering horizon. The next day, she met the man who fished and drank coffee from a cardboard cup. He said his name was Phil and asked what hers was. She didn't know why she said Ellen. She looked back over her shoulder, nervous she'd be spotted by one of her colleagues from the artist's residency who might call out to her by her name. Then she'd tell him she had two, an artist's name and another one for walking around and meeting people. And then he'd laugh. I bet you have two names too, Phil. Or is it Steve?
I think it sounds better in English. It's a better version. So this story took us here because we sent the magazine in as a thankful gesture, because it had been born here and it was part of the landscape. So we sent it, and we also threw the idea that we work collaboratively in translating ourselves and writing our own projects, and so we were invited, and that's why we're here. And we have had a very special week with Storm Debbie pounding on the windows, and but it's been part of the experience.
Yes.
It even made us, well, the lucky thing was, if I had been alone, I don't know what I would have done. I'm not sure of my conduct, but since Dorothy was staying in at the house that's a little bit higher than mine, and mine had started to, the water had started to gather in front of it, so that if I had wanted to sleep there or go back, I would have had to swim or to have water up to get in there. And who knows what would be next morning, no? Where would the water be? So we spent 2 days trying to ignore the peril and the warning alarms, get to a higher place, and we thought, what's higher than this? The roof, maybe. And there were the waves pounding, but I think the lesson is that this working very concentrated in both our translations, because Dorothy was translating from my novel Yo la Peor about Sor Juana. She was an illustrated nun in the 17th century in Mexico. She wrote beautiful poetry, and so I have a novel about her, Yo la Peor, I the worst, which she wrote with her blood in some papers at her time. And Dorothy had already translated 3 chapters, so we had material, and I had already translated her story. So we had many questions. We had things to share and to ask and to make the text better and to let it grow. And so I think that was, we would say in Spanish, providencial, providential. I don't know if that's the translation in English. But it saved us from concentrating each time the water got worse, and it was like this, parallel.
Literature is a consolation, no? It's a consolation, and it's another world that you can go to when things are rough, but you can focus on. And literature is nothing other than focus. It's of all the stories you could tell, which one are you going to tell? Of all the books you could translate, which one will you choose? It's a question of focusing on that one thing. And of course, as the water was rising and Monica came and she looked a little bit sort of, oh, I don't know what, the thunder was going and it was intense. So we just holed up there. At the Hermitage, in 4 days, I had 3 chapters, drafts of 3 chapters of this magnificent book, which she didn't say, but I will say, won the Elena Poniatowska Novel Prize, and is one of the most extraordinary novels that I really want to bring here. So this work is going to go to the National Endowment of the Arts, and I'm going to ask them for money to keep working, because I want to keep working on this beautiful novel. But beyond that, I think that compression that is also part of good writing and good poetry and good translation, not leaving anything extra, was also part of our physical experience this week. We were compressed. We were 2 women. We lived in my little Whitney back, for 2 days, and we did just fine. We did just fine.
Except for one thing.
Tell me.
The wine was in the and we couldn't open the place. because we would have liked a little bit of wine for
El
the
vino
moment.
y también el cangrejo,
And
porque
the
habíamos
lobster.
comprado cangrejo, and it was down there, and we were like, oh my God, we can't go get the cangrejo. But, you know, it's a small thing. But indeed, about the work here, you know, you come to do a certain work, right? I came to translate those chapters. I came to work with them, with Monica, but suddenly other things started to happen. Now, this is kind of the magic there at the Hermitage that, you know, you can talk to people about it, but until you experience it, you don't know. So I introduced Monica to a type of poem that's called tanka. And tanka, do you know tanka? Tanka is fantastic, and I got nuts about tanka several months ago and started writing tankas like crazy. And I showed Monica a tanka, and I decided I'm going to write a tanka every day I'm here. I'm going to write a tanka, and I was putting tankas all over the place. Well, before we knew it, we were writing tankas in the morning and texting each other our tankas, you know, and taking pictures of our tankas. Who knew? I think we must have written something like 15, 16 tankas since we're here. And then the storm comes. So suddenly we're sitting in there, and we have the candle, and we have our huevos revueltos, and we're talking about our lives. And out of our lives, suddenly comes other things. And suddenly I have to go write a short story. So the short story poured out of me, like the storm, like the rain. It had to come. And that was a very unusual experience for me, because usually in my regular life, somebody's gonna knock on the door, somebody's gonna need something. So, no, there, the story just poured out like water. So it's wonderful in these moments, and I think it's really worthwhile for the people who work at the Hermitage to understand that you can come with a project, and you can do that project, but you also leave with a bonus. You know, something extra happens, and it's that extra thing that I think can be so special.
Yes, and we had said before coming, I'm going to translate you. I'm not a professional translator like Dorothy is, but I've translated. I've translated 2 Canadian writers, a book of short stories, Margaret Atwood's book of short story, but it has not been published because the short story is a difficult genre to get published. It's a little bit like poetry, no? We wonder why, because you can read it in such a short time while you're waiting for the doctor to take care of you. I don't know, it's a portable thing. But I love short story, I love novels too, but I'm always insist that a way, for example, to get to know a writer like Dorothy is that somebody would read one of her short stories in Spanish. So I chose one before coming here, and I said, I want this because it's very contemporary. It's called Smile. It happens in New York. And why don't you give them a little flavor of the English part of it?
I will do that. So yes, Smile. Less than 15 minutes warning. Fuck, muttered Jane as we took the elevator down from the 14th floor. I had no answer for that. We took the elevator down, crossed the cavernous marble lobby of the Rockefeller Center skyscraper, and took the escalator down to the concourse where small stores lined the tunnel to the subway. I caught the heel of my right pump in a crack and almost pitched forward onto my face. Jane didn't seem to notice. The boutique was tiny and ugly, white plaster mannequins with blank expressions under cold fluorescent lighting. A saleswoman with big red hair bustled out from behind the counter to greet us. The readers, hanging on a chain around her neck, bounced on her shelf-like bosom. May I help you, ladies? She looked only at Jane. My boss had that effect on people. Jane scanned the 3 walls of beige, white, and black garments. Outfit, her size. She jabbed at the air in my direction. Corporate event, support staff. She talked like Morse code. The woman sized me up. Skirt, dress, pants, slacks, black, Blouse, said Jane. I was giving myself an internal pep talk. This was my first big event at the magazine, and I didn't want to screw up. The ad sales guys would be celebrating their windfall. The top execs, selected staff, and a sprinkling of A and B listers would prowl around the models. I might meet someone. I might get noticed. The clerk pulled an armload of clothes off the racks. Jane leaned in and talked behind her hand to me as if she were telling me secrets. Champagne, Caribbean trio, hors d'oeuvres, all the muckety-mucks, a real shindig, she said, surprising me again with her eclectic vocabulary. The models make nice with the guests. They announce the cover girl. She signs copies of the magazine. Honey, there'll be so much testosterone in there, it's gonna be hard to breathe. Jane snorted. Just stick close to Eve. The salesman thrust a pile of fabric into my arms. Chop, chop, said Jane.
Sonríe, sonríe. Menos de 50 minutos de aviso. Chinga, refunfuñó Jane. Mientras bajábamos en el elevador desde el piso 14. Yo no tenía respuesta para eso. Cruzamos el cavernoso lobby de mármol del rascacielos del Rockefeller Center y tomamos la escalera eléctrica que llevaba a la hilera de tiendas en el túnel hacia el metro. El tacón de mi zapato derecho se atoró en una grieta y por poco me lanza de cabeza. Jane no pareció notarlo. La boutique era fea y pequeña, maniquís de yeso blanco sin expresión bajo la fría iluminación fluorescente. Una vendedora con abundante cabellera pelirroja surgió de detrás del mostrador para atendernos. Los anteojos colgando de una cadena alrededor de su cuello rebotaron en sus pechos de repisa. ¿Les puedo ayudar en algo?, se dirigió solo a Jane. Mi jefa inspiraba esa reacción en la gente. Jane escaneó las 3 paredes de prendas beige, blancas y negras. Un conjunto, su talla. Perforó el aire con la mirada dirigida a mí. Evento corporativo, staff de soporte. Hablaba en código Morse. La mujer calculó mi talla. ¿Falda, vestido, pantalones? Pantalones negros, blusa, dijo Jane. Yo trataba de darme ánimos. Este era mi primer gran evento en la revista. No quería echarlo a perder. Los vendedores de anuncios estarían celebrando su jugosa ganancia. Los ejecutivos más altos, el staff selecto, y salpicados por aquí y por allá los de la lista VIP y los menos famosos rondarían a las modelos. Podría conocer a alguien, podría ser notada. La dependiente extrajo un armatoste de ropa de los racks. Jane se inclinó hacia mí, cubriéndose con la mano como si se secreteara conmigo. Champaña, trigo caribeño, hors d'oeuvre. Todos los cacas grandes. Una verdadera pachanga, dijo sorprendiéndome de nuevo con su ecléctico vocabulario. Las modelos van bien con los invitados. Anuncian a la chica de la portada. Ella firma ejemplares de la revista. Honey, habrá tanta testosterona ahí dentro que va a ser difícil respirar. Jane resopló. Solo estate cerquita de Eve. La vendedora arrojó una pila de tela a mis brazos. Chop, chop, dijo Jane. We hope it makes you want to read it.
So as you could tell, I think you can probably tell just hearing that text how much we had to talk about, right? I mean, things that jump out at you might be fuckity fuck fuck, or it might be muckety muck, or any of those strange things that my character says, and you think, well, what are we gonna do with that? What are we gonna do with A and B listers? How are we going to handle that in Spanish in a way that is faithful to the story, but communicates something meaningful to somebody, in this case, who will be reading this in Mexico, no?
And it has to sound natural, no? That means you don't get the translation the first time. You go several times through it. First, you have to read what you're going to translate and understand it, or think you understand it. Because today we made a correction. Because I hadn't understood something, and even if we had read the story 3 times together, there still was an imprecision. And that's a fascinating job about the translation. It has to get to this precision that conveys meaning, but also sound and music and the flow of the narrative and beauty, and that will put you there without feeling that you're reading some translation and that it's clumsy, and that, for example, decisions and things we talked about, living words in English. Well, language around the planet is full of English words, like staff. Staff, we put it staff. Sometimes they put an E before it, but staff, we all understand. Rack.
Rack.
We say rack. It's your word, but we got it and it's there. But for example, honey. How would I translate honey if we don't say honey? We don't say miel. Hoy mielecita, no. We don't say azuquitar. So, querido, maybe, querida, dear. But I thought honey, so that's the type of decisions you have to make. Honey gave it the flavor. And if somebody doesn't understand it, it's just a context deduction, and it sounds like a way of addressing somebody. And so, leaving some words in English, honey.
Right, because Jane, after all, is a publicity director in New York City, you know. So for her to say anything other than honey would be, so we do the same thing working with Monica's texts, particularly Yo la Peor. I found with these 3 chapters that I've been working on, we chose very carefully 3 chapters that would tell something about the novel. It's a long novel. So we chose chapters that would attract but also focused on particular characters that we wanted to draw out. And this is taking place in the 17th century in Mexico. So things happen, you know, you say, well, I don't want to translate epazote. What am I going to say about epazote? Epazote is epazote. You know, well, they don't know what epazote is. Well, guess what? There's Mr. Google is sitting over there. You can go find out what epazote is. And that actually changes the art of translation, I think, in this period, that everyone's walking around with a cell phone. You know, now for me, the ethic I have now is that epazote will appear in this translation along with some other words. It will not be italicized. It will not be exoticized. It will just sit there with all the other beautiful words, just as the text, as the word it is. And sometimes what I'll do, what was the thing when Juana Inés and Refugio go to the templo? What are they eating? I forget.
Esquites.
Esquites.
You know esquites, ¿verdad? You cannot translate it, but she describes it.
But I described it. So in that particular case, I wanted to describe esquites because later, when the bells ring and Juana Inés and Refugio have to race in for mass in el templo, they're stuffing los esquites, you know, the ones that are left in their mouths. So I want the reader to feel what that is, that they're seasoned, that they're corn kernels, that they're, you know, wet, and that, you know, what are they stuffing in their mouths? So I'll add sometimes a parenthetical, not definition, but just a little extra support so that people can feel the texture, the taste, what it is, no? But I think now in translation, we talk, me and my friends, my translator friend, we talk a lot about decolonializing translation. And this is really important, you know, that the text, contemporary or not, it's not an archaeological artifact. It's a story. And it's someone's story. And we look at it from the point of view of, you know, on a level. Not down, not as something. So this is all part of the thinking process, that it's not just the it's not just the translation of words, it's also having an ethic about how you are going to approach the text in a respectful way, no? That does not exoticize in any way. So it's an interesting thing, that sometimes translation really means not translating.
That's true. I think that the hard part of translation is that it has to produce the same feeling of life, of an alternative life. That's fiction, no? Make-believe.
Yeah.
Make-believe you're there in the 17th century or in New York in the 21st century in this 14th floor. You have to have the same feeling a reader in English would have, no? So that's why I was saying there's several levels of work. First, getting the story organized in the language you're translating it into, no, in Spanish. And then when you read it the second time, you'll see, without looking at the original story, which is the interesting part. Now you're not going like that, tac, tac, tac. You're into the version in English, in Spanish.
Yeah.
So you read it, and when you feel like, oh, I need to, when we used to drive with us, no?
Yeah.
This gear.
Still driving one of those.
You feel that, oh, I have to put something, there's something on the way.
Yeah.
And then you realize that you were mimicking the construction, the grammatic construction in English, and that's not the way. So you take other decisions. You're constantly, we were talking with Jess about that, taking constant decisions.
Right.
You do that when you're writing also, when you're creating the work. But when you're translating, you're again taking several decisions that have to do with cultural background too, with idiomatic expressions that might not mean literally the same thing. So you have to look for the idiomatic expression that's an equivalent to that one, no?
Right, that's absolutely true, and I think I enjoy listening to you talk about this because it's, first of all, something I usually do all alone in a room, you know, and I think about these things like what the levels are. You're translating, then you're checking the translation, and then you're leaving the original aside, and you're just looking at the translation as a work of literature. Does it work? Does it not work? Does it flow? Am I writing well? Because translation is a specialized form of writing. It's not anything else, so it has to be written well. And when you're dealing with a writer like Monica, to take on the challenge of rising to her level, you know, because she's just a magnificent writer. So that's the mission. That's the mission impossible. You need to rise to her level and write literature that is as great as hers. So by that point, what you're remembering, what I'm remembering anyway, is how did I feel when I read this in Spanish? What did I feel the first time I read this? What surprised me? What made me cry? What, you know, if it doesn't do that, it's always for me. I think for you as well, it's always for me, the success or failure is, does it make my heart beat the same way in the translation as it did when I first read it? And if it doesn't come to that level, then it's not good enough.
Also, I also believe in what I believe when I'm writing something where there's nothing, I'm starting a short story or a novel, I believe in writing with your senses. So the piece that you're writing has to be seen and smelled and the texture, and so all your senses have to be convocados, engaged. Thank you, engaged, so that you are there, that you are believing that place where the author is putting you, no? And I find it's quite nice. I was thinking today, because I wrote my article for the newspaper, and guess what was the theme? Translation with Dorothy, because it's what we've been doing. But I was thinking how, I don't know if you feel that now that you write your own stories, that it makes a good equilibrium? Okay, sorry. I have all these doubts now when I talk in English. This equilibrium between when you're creating, you have the whole responsibility of make believe. There's nothing and there will be a world there. But when you're translating, somebody had that responsibility before. So you're kind of on somebody's shoulders. And it's very rewarding to be just working with, you don't have to make the story, it's done, but you're working with the exactness of words and the sound. I think it's so important, the sound and the music of the text, and this, it becomes a lesson for your own writing, as you were saying. And I'm very pleased to see that my workshop has done an excellent job, because I like her short stories, and the one she wrote here that's called Storm, and I read it today just practically before coming, because I said I can't resist not reading it, because she wrote it in the heat of an idea and the moment, and that's fantastic. That happened to me with the mangrove.
Yes.
When I wrote the mangrove, it was in the heat of being here, in a more peaceful moment, but that peaceful moment had like a little of a danger thing, especially if you come from a country or a city where violence is always, might be around, and you live like an animal that's looking around you, no? So I like the idea that the place gives you a material you didn't even think that would happen. Not only the concentration possibility and the silence, and I'm working on a novel, so I brought my novel. You see, 10 days have been so fruitful. I brought my novel I had not read it. I had just written it. So I'm reading it and putting and mapping it on these fabulous walls they have at the studios in the Hermitage,
Yes.
where you just can pin your little papers and you're looking at your novel for the first time. And this has been possible here, so it's gonna be very rewarding to go back having done something that might have taken months, really.
Absolutely.
Because you know what life is like. Life is full of of things.
Also,
no?
sadly, we don't have wall-sized bulletin boards at home, which is really, really bad. I think that I was getting a little sign that maybe it's time. James, do you have any questions for us? And we thought we'd open up a little to you as well. There's so much to talk about, but we want to be respectful of your time.
Thank you, first of all, for sharing your thoughts and your work with us. Just incredible. I'll ask one or two and then open it up for the rest of the time that we have. I'm really glad to hear that Debbie, D-E-B-B-Y, go figure, was maybe had some silver linings to it, right? That it's sort of, its presence is undeniable, right? So you sort of have to go like, okay, what can I make with this? We were hearing it from Signe Heraday, another artist on campus, saying like, okay, well, this is present. What hay can I make out of this very wet occurrence? So thanks for sharing that. And hopefully we'll get to read Storm at some point.
Absolutely.
You started talking about this, and I'm curious, with having a computer in everybody's pocket and AI and Google Translate and all of that, how do you think about that as a writer and as a translator? Is it a tool that we can pick up? Is it like a weapon that is threatening your future? Like, how do you exist in relationship to this very powerful thing out there that is writing and translating?
Yeah, that's a great question, James. I mean, I was just at the Madrid Book Fair, and I was staying with a friend who, besides being a philosopher, beware of the philosopher, he's also a big information technology guy. And he sat with me on his, porch with the jamón serrano right in front of us and the queso manchego, and he said, Dorothy, your profession is doomed. And I was like, Angel, usually I like you, but not right at this moment. And I tried to explain to him, James, that translation is not that. It's not a word for word. It's not a grain for a grain. It's not a vessel to another vessel. It is an art like any other art. I tried to explain to him that yes, you can go to Google Translate. Don't go to Google Translate. There are better ones you can go to. that's a disaster. But you can go there to help your reading of something, I think. But translation, literary translation, I don't mean the translation of, I don't know, an invitation to your daughter's wedding or something like that. Not that that couldn't rise to the level of literature as well, but I think literature, literary translation, it's like saying that AI will replace painters. It's like saying that AI, maybe some people think that. I personally don't. And I think that it's really something we have to talk a lot about, because it's an important theme, and I think that's one of the pleasures of being here talking to you about translation right now and talking about all those subtleties and choices we make that are as much cultural as political in some way, as linguistic. So yeah, good question.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Monica?
Yes, I think these new tools, technological, put us on how we have to work with appreciation, because in IA or IE or the other way in Spanish or English could write a story, but it could be a correct story.
Yeah.
It could have the
Right.
ingredients that makes it a correct story,
Right.
with a beginning and desarrollo, and you get to the climax and the end. Well, that could be done. The house could be cleaned by a machine also. Yes, that could be done. But that is not art. That is not an original piece that conveys how you see the world and the human and humanity, and you add to it. Artificial intelligence doesn't add.
Yes.
It just uses the material that's there and
Yeah.
prepares. It's like ¿cómo se llama that thing that you cook and you put with you say, I want to make a lasagna.
Microwave?
No, this machine that cuts that prepares everything.
A Cuisinart?
A cuisine. No, I don't know if it's that, but it could do the recipe.
Yeah.
But it won't create a new chef author, new platillo, no?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I think art, but that means the consumer of literature or of the writing material has to exigir something else, no? That's it, something that is not just another correct. You know what's scary?
What?
I didn't know that, but one of the guys that goes to my workshop, he said he put his short story or chapter of a novel to a workshop thing. There's also like a workshop, artificial intelligence, and the comments were not bad at all from the artificial intelligence. It said you have to, and I said I agree with it. I thought that was scary,
Yeah, it can be scary. for
but it
sure.
could be a tool.
It can be. I mean, I'm not an IT person. The way I understand artificial intelligence is that it's predicting the most likely next word, right? So it's using all of the resources across the internet to say, this is likely the next thing that happens, which to me sounds like a formula for mediocrity by definition,
Formula for
right?
mediocrity.
Can be anything but.
Yeah.
See.
All right, a question that's more fun. What are some words that you absolutely hate to translate, that are like just impossible? I don't know how to do this. Like, what is something that defies moving it from place to place or from language to language, culture to culture? Is there something that just like has stumped you in the past, or that has just took you a while to figure out?
Well, we actually, Monica put a challenge at the beginning. She said, word a day. Find a word a day that is a pain in the neck. Yeah, and we actually started doing that.
I
And
like that.
you know, it's interesting because I think it's a good question. I think that question gestures at a particular, for me, a particular set of words that have a great deal of what we call linguistic density. So there are words that have linguistic density, which means that maybe they can be interpreted in different ways. And so when you use them in a text, they offer the reader a lot of chances to come up with their own, interpretation. Then there are words that are just like, we had calzada. We were talking about calzada, and I know what a calzada looks like in Mexico, and it doesn't look like a cobblestone street, say, in Germany or in Philadelphia. It's not the same kind of street. It tends to be, it's stones, but it's not those stones.
I see.
So what do you do when you want the person to see la calzada, that you know what it looks like, littler stones, different varying sizes, plunged into the ground, not square, So I still haven't worked that out.
That's a perfect example.
It's a perfect example, but I will say this, James, I don't hate any words.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I don't hate the words. I love them to pieces, and I actually, and this is probably one reason I do this, I really like those ones that break my head, that I walk around thinking, how can I do it? Because in the end, it's not about me being able to translate that word. It's about, again, as Monica suggested, making a picture for the reader. I need them to see it, I want them to know what Juana Inés really walked across, not some other version of it, but that version. So that's an example, I think.
What I found out by reading especially, is, for example, that there's some words in English or in Spanish that are not, they don't have an equivalent, and they're much better. For example, I love the word homesick. Homesick, it's so precise. Homesick, you miss your house, o sea, the place where you belong, no? And we don't have a word in Spanish that makes the same sense. You have nostalgia, añoranza, but not homesick. So suddenly you come to terms with, why is the expression in a language so precise and so diffuse in the other? How can I, for example, in those words we shared every day, I had a problem with one paragraph because Dorothy says, flat shoes, and pumps. And I said, pumps? We don't have anything equivalent to pumps. What's up? And she had to explain, and then, how do I translate it? Because it's going to be zapato bajo, zapato plano. It would be boring. It was a problem. The shoes were problematic because of the classification in this catalog that she produces or that exists in English. And if this translation were done by a Spaniard, if I would do it for Spain, it would be different because they have the manoletitas that are the flat shoes, no? And they have all this catalog, but in Latin American Spanish, I don't think we have this variation. We just put low heel, flat heel, or something more automatic, no? But some things like this that seem so little, so trivial, maybe. But that they put you in the face of the language you speak.
Absolutely. Things we take for granted, right? That
yes.
And it's an interesting point you raise about that some languages have such a specific term for that, while others have terms around that or words around that, but not quite the same thing.
Right, and I think those are they're actually two good answers, because Monica's is about that. It's about, we don't have that word. And the other is, we don't have that thing, right? Yeah. I mean, the thing is just not here. So if there's no word to that thing, and I have sometimes, and I will not be able to remember right at this moment, but I've invented words too. Because the translator sometimes has
totally
to
within your domain.
Go for it. Invent yourself a word, that works in this moment. You have to really be willing, I think, as a translator, to be humble, but also daring in certain moments.
What we had fun with was, this has to do with differences. There was one part where Dorothy wrote that the model, Eve, is something about like a sexy farmer. So I thought the sexy farmer in Mexico has huaraches, sandals. But farmers in the States don't wear huaraches, no? They have boots, they have other kind of shoe. So I had a whole different description for what she, it was not with the feet, it was with the hands. So it was a mess, but we arranged it.
We figured it out.
Different farmers.
What do translators do when they can't talk to the other person about what this is?
Ay, Dios mío, I have no idea because honestly, you know, there are a lot of reasons why I translate contemporary literature. That's one of them. But also because I do focus on women's literature, and there are just a lot of women, a lot of talented women, you know, that are publishing now, and why not have a conversation with somebody who's there to talk with you, you know? But you know, what do? A lot of research.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And you send questions if somebody's alive but far away. You can send it to the or you can Zoom now and but you need to figure out certain things that are not just there by even researching. I think it goes beyond that. No?
It goes beyond that. Actually, I just translated something for City College by Oscar de Andrade, who was part of the Fluxus movement in Brazil. And it's called the Anthropophagus Manifesto. And it's a really important document. It's not very long, but it's really, really hard. And what I was basically doing was searching for other translations of it, almost all of which I felt fell short. Now, he's no longer around to talk to, but I arranged like furniture in a room, all these other translations, and then I had the original, and then I let them have an argument, and then I wrote my own. And that has something to do with another thing about translation, which is sometimes we rehabilitate a text, because there are texts out there that have been poorly translated, or poorly, they just didn't make it, you know, somehow. And so you reach in and you say, let me help you. You know, let me, with everything we know now, with whatever talent I may possess, you know, let me make this better. So that's another thing we do sometimes.
All right, I promised I would open it up a little bit. I'll stop hogging the floor. What questions do you have? What are you curious about? Got time for a couple? Or I will hold. Yeah, right here.
Well, from the very beginning, I was so interested to know, Dorothy, is English your first language or Spanish your first language?
That's such a nice question. Well, English is my first language. I live a lot of my life in Spanish. A lot. Like, I think, first of all, 80% of the books I read are in Spanish. And my literary community is in Mexico. So I spend a lot of time in Spanish. Mm-hmm.
What language do you think in?
Both.
Both, yeah.
Both. I mean, I write in Spanish too. You know, so sometimes, you know, Sandra Maria Esteves, the great Puerto Rican poet, wrote a poem when she said, I write two languages broken into each other. And sometimes I feel it that way. You know, writing in Spanish for me es un gran desafío. Gran desafío, because it's not my own, and yet sometimes I have ideas in Spanish. Sometimes the inspiration is in Spanish, and therefore the words begin to appear in Spanish, and then sometimes I get stuck. And so, okay, I'll write a little in English, and then boom, then I'll go back, and then it's always a back and forth for me. It's become that, it's almost like a mental problem. But it's interesting because it reminds me always about what it is, what my relationship, what all of our relationship is to language, how we create reality with the language.
Thank you for the question. Time for one more. Yeah.
Okay, so I knew nothing about translation. I wouldn't say I know a lot now, but you two seem to have a really special relationship. But is that the same for all contemporary writers and their translators? Or, I mean, is this the relationship that you have with all of the authors that you translate? Because how could you? You know, right? And it's just so wonderful.
I get jealous because she has all the, I get jealous.
Who have you been translating? Yeah.
Who have you been translating?
Right, but so what happens when you don't have, I mean, it's a living writer.
Yes.
You don't have this same connection that you two clearly have.
Well, what our relationship, which is a friendship,
Yes.
which is a mentorship, which is a professional relationship as well, is utterly unique in my life. I have never, and I've been in the arts for many years. I used to run a arts and education organization in New York called El Taller Latinoamericano, and I have been awash in artists and writers and songwriters and musicians all my life, like my entire adult life. This is very special for me. I hope it's special for you. This is very special for me. But I translate other people. And I would say just like you have different relationships with different friends, they work different ways. Some authors, to go directly to the meat of your question, don't really want to have much to do with the translation. There are authors who'd rather honestly not talk to you about it. They just say, I trust you, go, you know, right? And that's fine, that's okay. I don't need to be friends with all the people I translate, but it adds something to have a sympathy with the other person, because you understand something of how I understand something about how she faces the world and how she feels the world, and because I feel it in a very similar way, it makes my job easier. But no, it's not common.
No, I've had other translators before meeting Dorothy, and they were, sorry Dorothy, that's the truth.
It's all coming out.
And it was nice, it was of course very cordial, but I think it's Dorothy's character. She's very intense, devoted. She would go to Mexico to be with me and so it's this kind of commitment, and also that I read English.
Yes.
That I can see the text in English and say, no, this word doesn't mean what I wanted to say.
Right.
So that knowledge of the language also makes a bridge that is very fair, very, so we can discuss the words in the same level.
I think at the end of the day, actually, that makes our conversations, and especially these at the Hermitage, have been fascinating. You know, I wish we had been recording some of them, because I'm sure I've been taking notes along the way, but it's very interesting what we've discovered.
And also the way we've talked. I go into her room, I talk in Spanish, but then in English, and then we write ourselves in English sometimes in Spanish. The tanga is in Spanish, now it's in English, now it's in Spanish. So we're all the time like in a wavy English-Spanish situation on these days.
I suspect it's good to be near the water for that, you know?
Oh, yes.
Well, we are just about out of time. Oh, sure, last
Can
one.
I just say something? When the two of you were explaining your time at the Hermitage, with Debbie and everything, so I'm thinking maybe 5 years down the road, you're gonna have a lot more experiences like that. So I'm expecting a beautiful memoir from the two of you.
That's
I
a
was
good
already
project.
imagining, like the title to the book.
That's a
But no,
nice
There you go.
project.
There you go.
Yeah, it was such a joy to hear the two of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
is available downstairs. I'm sure we could convince them to maybe sign a copy or two, if
And
you
it's
would
two
like.
Yes.
different versions available too, which are right up
Which
there.
are, yes,
as you
one
see.
one in Spanish, one in English.
I think one is bilingual, it's
One is
Spanish
bilingual
English,
and
and the
one
other
And
is
one is only English.